In this tutorial, I want to show you an example of how to use a REST API in a SwiftUI app. And I'm going to use the cat API as an example. This API is really nice because you can fetch quite a lot of different data, for example, cat breeds with some information. You can also load a lot of nice images, and images are always good. And what we are going to build is this little app. So I have here one screen with all the cat breeds, including a search bar. And it's also loading the images lazy, so only when this view appears and it's loading the images. And you see this nice little loading animation. We are going to use newer SwiftUI features, for example, the searchable view modifier, and here this AsyncImage view. And you tap on one of these rows, it goes to the detail view with the same image actually, and here a little bit of the description. It really also depends on what images they are. And right now I'm not showing all of the data that is actually available. There's quite a few more that you can add. You could also add here a favorite button in order to save this cat breed or even the cat image. In this example, I'm using already existing code that I developed previous in tutorials. The first one of these was how to actually read the documentation of the APIs and make a simple network request. And in the second, I was talking about decoding, because when we work with a REST API, we get the data in form of a JSON file. So we need to map this file format to our own custom Swift types. I'm going to use a little bit code that I already have. If you're not comfortable with these topics, you should definitely have a look there. And I'm going to use this code that I developed actually in the playgrounds and use it now in an actual project, which means that we have to ask a couple of more questions. For example, where am I actually placing this kind of code? How do I organize my projects? And in this example, I want to use MVVM. And we are going to see where we put our network layer. And the other thing that I definitely want to include is loading states. For example, when I first launch my application, I want to show a loading indicator that I'm actually fetching something. And also I want to give the user the possibility to see when things go wrong. So maybe I want to show some error informations. And maybe the possibility to reload. So maybe we add a little button to reload when there's an error. It's always nice to have some kind of error handling. And to expand on the networking layer a little bit more, I also want to very shortly talk about unit tests. Let's now start coding. I am here in my playground. So this is, for example, one of these JSON files that I would retrieve for my server response. And our custom Swift type for breeds, which has an ID, the name, some descriptions, the image informations. And we have here the code for creating this network request. So I'm going to move some of this code now in our final project. So I'm creating a new Swift project. This is cat project with interface SwiftUI, including tests. When I create a new project, I have here one main view with the window group and my content view. So now we have to decide how to organize our code a little bit. And since I said we want to use MVVM, just a short recap, we have part of our code that belongs to the UI, the user interface, what we show on the device. That would be the view part. Then we have on the very other side the model part, so our data models. This is what you just saw with my breed model. So it's the data and the logic. Now you saw that I also had this code with the network request. And this is a little bit more related to where I get my data from and how I format my data. This kind of code I don't want to directly put in my views. I want to separate it in an extra layer. And we're going to use the view model for this, because this is anyway supposed to be processing the data and interpreting the data in order to show it easier for the views. So I will try to organize my code in these 3 separate blocks: model, and view. Just for now, I'm creating here 3 different groups. This is view, the model, and the last one I'm not calling view model because this is a little bit too general sometimes. So I'm calling this here networking. So starting with the model layer, this is where I'm going to place my breed, my structs. So these are all Swift files because it has nothing to do with views. This is my cat breed. So the whole code that I developed in the playground, I can just copy over there. Okay, this was just the example. Maybe I don't really need to place this here. So I have my breed. I probably don't need to call this cat breed because it has, from this, you don't see if it's a cat or not. So I have all the properties, the coding keys, because I had to rename some of the keys, and I had to write my own initializer from decoder because I had to transform some of the values to booleans. And I had here also a second type, which is breed image. This is a nested type in this JSON, and the one that I care about is here, this URL. I probably shouldn't leave this in the same file, so I'm creating a different file, SwiftUI file, which is breed image. Just going to move this over here. Also with the example for this JSON file. This is everything related to the model, the structs that I created. It's actually quite useful if you start with your models in a playground, because then you don't need to take care of the UI, and it's a lot faster to run in the playground than every time building your projects. Okay, now that I have here my models, the next part that I haven't used is here my URLSession share data task with URL call to actually get my breeds from the server. And this is the code that I wanted to add in a view model. So what this view model is supposed to do is fetch my breeds. So in my networking folder, I'm creating a new file, again a Swift file. And this is my breed fetcher, which is a class breed fetcher, because it is a view model. And in SwiftUI, this has to be an observable object. The property that I actually care about here, because this is the one I want to use my UI, is this breeds, an array of breeds. So this is add published var breeds. And this is an array of breeds. I'm starting here with an empty one. We can have here an initializer and do some work. And let's for now create here a function that I can call when my application launches or when the view appears to fetch all breeds. So now I can go ahead and take all of this code and place it here. So there's a couple of things that we should do. So for example, show an error if we cannot create this URL. Then we should also here show an error. Then we should also throw an error. This could be when we have an error from our URLSession, or if our response code wasn't good, or if we cannot decode our array properly, if the data doesn't match our type. And when I say show error, I mean I want to show it in the UI to the user, and which means that I have to have some kind of property with the error information. So I'm going to show here at published var error message. This is this optional string, and if I don't have an error, this should be nil. And the other state that can happen is, the states that can happen is, I start my application, I'm loading. So I should also have here some kind of, am I loading? Am I in this loading stage? So it is loading, false. If I'm not loading, I might either have an error and show a button to retry, or I'm successfully got my breeds, and then I have here these properties and we can show our list. So when I go here in my fetch all breeds, I should start and say my is loading is true. And when my task here returns, I should say is loading is false. Now this is in a closure. So it's already giving me this error. Reference self explicitly. I don't want to create here a reference cycle, so I'm starting with unowned self. The second thing that I actually didn't do yet is, if I have here breeds, I want to assign this to my breeds properties. So in my do catch block, when I'm successfully having some data and I can decode this, I should tell myself.breeds to the breeds array that I got here. So in order to show this in my UI, I already said we have 3 different states. I'm loading, I have an error, or I have breathe. So in my view, I'm creating here 3 different views. This is my breed list view. And then another one, which is my error view. And then another one, which is my loading view. I don't have anything in them yet, but I definitely need to decide when to show which one, and this depends on the 3 properties here. In my content view, I'm going to decide which of my states, which of my views I want to show, depend on what state my fetching is going. So first of all, I actually need to have here one of these breed fetcher instances to fetch something. And this is a view model, so there has to be a state object. Object var breed fetcher. This is a breed fetcher. And I'm creating here a breed fetcher actually. So I'm just going to delete the text. So depending on what my state is, so for example, my breed fetcher is loading. If my breed fetcher is loading, then I'm showing the loading view. Else, if breed fetcher's error message is not nil, then I'm showing my error view, which actually needs to have access to this breed fetcher because this one has the error message. So I need to handle this down. So in my error view, I have to have here an observed object var breed fetcher of type breed fetcher. Just going to handle here a new instance of this class. So now my content view, I can give this my breed fetcher. Then, else, if I'm not loading and I don't have an error, I should have some breeds. So I'm going to show my breed list view. And this one actually needs to know the breeds. So it needs to have access to the breed array. We could again here pass down the whole breed fetcher or only the array. So for example, I can say here breeds. And this is an array of breed. And when initialize, I'm just going to show for now an empty array. So now in my content view, I can give here the breeds from my breed fetcher's breeds. If I launch my application, I won't see a lot because my breed fetcher, I still didn't call load this. So you could use this views on a peer view modifier to start a fetch, but I actually already want to start this as soon as I launch because this is the main thing anyway. So I might as well start my fetch in the initialize of my breed fetcher. So my init, I'm saying fetch all breeds. So I can launch this and hope for the best. So I didn't populate this properly, so that's why the UI is pretty much boring. I did leave some print statements in here, for example, breeds. So first of all, I probably should delete here this limit of 9. And then the other thing, the more important error message here is publishing changes from background thread is not allowed because this URLSession shared data task publisher returns me values on a background thread. And here, for example, when I update my UI with setting the self-bird breeds to this breeds, I should do this on the main thread. Dispatch q.main.async and then set my self.breeds. We don't need this. Then here is the same actually for this loading. There's one problem that I didn't see before. Coding key not found for images. This seems to be not always valid. So I have to make my image information here optional. So my image type might not be existing in there. And because I have here my own initializer, I have to change here a little bit the situation when you go through all these values to decode. And there's a different one, which is decode if it's existing, if present. And the arguments are the same. And I have to also make my breed image all of these values here optionals. Because sometimes it has actually a key image, but the value in there are all nil. Okay, now we have something. You don't see it because my 3 amazing views don't have anything. Before I go there, one thing that I didn't take care of is actually here my error message, because I never actually put anything on there. And I'm going to create my own error type. You will see a little bit later the other advantage of this. So this is a new file, a Swift file. This is API error. So we have to go through all of the cases or things that can happen for errors, because I want to have here my own error. This is in enum, because I have specific cases that I want to take care of. API error. This needs to conform to the error protocol. So I have here a case when I don't have an URL. So this is a bad URL case. Then I have a case from my data task publisher. The response might not be good. This we should check here. If let response is response as HTTP URL response. In this case, we can check the response's status code. And this should be between 200 and 299. So 200 until 299 dot contains my response's status code. And if this is not the case, error. So this would be the case of bad response. And I also want to pass down the status code. So this would be the associated value of int. Then the other error here is actually if my URL session returns me directly an error. So this is a URL error. And I'm using here an URL error. So I'm just keeping all the values that might be interesting. And then the last thing that can happen is here my decoding. So when I catch this error, I'm just keeping it. Case parsing. And the last one is unknown. The second thing that I really like to do is have some nice descriptions of errors for each of these cases. And I want to have 2 different strings, one for myself for debugging and one for the user to show in the UI. In order to be able to be allowed to override here the descriptions, I need to make this type conforming to custom string convertible, which means that now I can actually have here a var is localized description. This is a string and computed property. And another one, this is description string, and this is the one that I'm using for debugging. So info for debugging. I'm the only one who sees it, or other programmers. And the localized description is the one that I'm using for the user as user feedback. So for example, then you can show, oh yeah, your internet connection's off, and the user can actually go and turn it on again, come back, press the retry button. This is a much better experience, especially if you have informative descriptions. Just going to add a couple of them by switching here on myself and going for the cases. I changed the parsing case to also keep the decoding error, because then I actually, just for myself here for the descriptions, under the parsing case I can print the description, so I can see maybe one of my coding keys is wrong. Now that I have this API error, I actually want to use it in my view model. One thing that you could do, that you might be inclined to do, is here, for example, I can use a if-let statement for this. Say my error message is my API error, the case for bad URL, the localized description. And then always here manually set it. Actually, I probably should use here a guard else statement. And then use return. So you could go through with this. This is perfectly valid code. But what I actually want to do is make this a little bit more reusable and easier later for the unit test. So I'm going to move this function in a separate layer. So this is a new file, API service. This is a struct API service. So I wanted to just move this function over here, saying fetch breeds. And ideally what you want to do is return here an array of these breeds. However, this does not work because I'm actually using in my breed fetcher a asynchronous call with this URLSession. So it wouldn't be able to directly return a value. This returned value comes later. So instead of this returning the breeds directly, we have to work with completion handlers. So first of all, it needs to actually know the URL. This might be an optional URL. This is the only input argument that I currently need. And then the second is the completion handler. So this is an escaping closure. And I want to work with the returned value. Might be either an actual value or an array of breeds or one of my own arrow types. So in this case, it's quite useful to work with results. This is a results type. So this is a specific wraparound data, which has two different states: success, then you have a data thingy, or an error state. So my success state has a type of an array of breed. In case of my failure, I'm returning here an API error, so one of my own. And this does not return any values, so returning here void. So now I'm moving here this part, starting from the URL until task resume in my API service. So we're starting here by actually using the URL from my argument. So if this is in URL, then I continue, and otherwise I want to actually throw this error. So this is let error. So I'm calling here my completion handler and saying result dot failure with this error. This should not have a localized description. So then if I go in my data task handler, I don't reference here self anymore because I'm working with this escaping closure. So if I go through here, the first error that I wanted to throw was if I have a URL error. So this is my first case of if let error is equal to error as URL error. So if I have an error, I want to not proceed with my decoding because it's going to be some weird stuff. So I'm again complete this task with a failure, and this time it's an API error of URL with my error that here I converted to an URL error. Else, if this is this case here, if I get here my response and it's not in this range of 200 to 299, then I want to complete with a results of failure again, API error for bad response code, and I'm sending here my responses status code. Else, this is now the good case of I have something. So this is else if let data is data. Then I can do here my decoding with this do catch block. So first I'm trying to decode this. Instead of here setting this property, I now should also complete and send here a result of success. And in the success case, I have to pass some data that I successfully decoded. This is my breeds. If I have here an error, now I should complete again with a failure type. Results failure, and this time I'm API error dot passing, and here I'm sending my passing error. I don't need to do this here anymore. Is decoding error. Return here. You might now say, this is unnecessarily complicated, but one thing to keep in mind is, for example, if you're fetching different things like images, a lot of this code might be very nice to reuse, because if I have a different type, difference is I have a different URL, and my results here would return me a different breed or different type, which means that my decoder would be different. So in this case, my function would need to work with generics, because I want to have here a generic type that conforms to decodable, because this is then usable here with my decoder. And I'm here specifying the type. This is t.type, giving still the URL as an optional, and completion. This is looking very similar, except that I'm using here as the return type t, so my generic and my API error. And this is a function that returns no values. Completion at escaping. So the difference between these two functions is basically I replaced the concrete type here, which is an array of beats, with this generic could be anything type. Anything that is decodable can be used in this function. So in this case, I would use all of this and now replace the things here when I actually have to specify the type. So this would be here the type. This is my result, which I also return here. So we now can use this one of these two functions in my breed fetcher. So I'm not going to do this here. I have to first create one of my service, API service instances. And my service, I'm saying fetch all breeds. So I still actually need the URL. Give here the URL. And in the completion handler, I get the result. And we have to check what's the result, because this has two cases. Switch results, case.failure with this error. Self.error message is my error.localized description. And just for now, I want to print this actually. So I'm just going to print here. And what I wanted to have just for myself, the more information this was in the description. This would be the same print statements if I use here just the arrow. So I don't need both of them. And then I have the case of success, breeds, self.breeds is breeds. Because I have to here again a closure. I don't want to have a reference cycle. I use again unowned self. Then here my is loading. When I get my results, I also say self.isLoading is false, because I finished my network request. And when I here call this fetch all breeds, maybe I should reset my error message to null. With this result type, it's actually really nice to handle two different cases. My failure type, where I get the error also handled down, or my success type where I get the breeds. The additional nice thing about my extra layer is that this view model becomes quite small. Right now I only have one network call, which is not that much, but for example you might need to fetch multiple things, also in a succession, so one after the other, and then you would have multiple functions in here calling each other, and then it's just nicer not to get everything together. Okay, so now let's start building our views, starting with the loading view, which is the easiest. So this is showing here a progress view. You can also have a different kind of animation. I'm just going to look here for a cat emoji. And I'm going to make this rather big, size of 40, which I have to wrap in a VStack. So I have them together. And I still have one error, which is I did not in my breed fetcher. Here when I go through my results type, I have to again use dispatch.main.async to go back to the main queue, because everything that happens in here is just setting up the results to my properties that I'm using in the UI. So now it's this tiny little loading animation, and then my main one, which is still empty. Having a nice loading view is probably more like a gimmick, but you can improve this UI. Okay, now the error view. So definitely I should see here a couple of things. So again, I can use this text with an emoji. I'm just using the crying cat. Again, 80. Okay, I have now my crying cat, and I should also show the error message, which is in my breed fetcher, the error message. This is actually an option, but if I show this view, it should be actually there. Now the breed fetcher that I used here in this view doesn't have any error message, so I'm just going to create a couple of a little bit of helper code in my breed fetcher. So this is mark preview helpers. For example, I wanted to have one static function, error state, that returns me one of my own breed fetcher types, but with some error information. So let fetcher is a breed fetcher, and I'm setting the fetcher's error message to one of my types. URL error, not connected to the internet case. .localize description, and returning here this fetcher. I used here one of the standard errors, which is not connected to the internet, and I'm just using the localized description. The second state that I would like to take care of is the data state. So actually a success state. Again, a breed fetcher. So I create another instance of my fetcher. And in this case, I would like to populate the breeds array. I just need to create a default breed types. And I'm going to do this here in my struct. So this is another static func. Example 1, returning here a breed. Let's breed. And now I actually see that I lost my default initializer. Every time you use here this init from decoder, you need to write your own initializer again. So just a breed should have a name, string, ID, string. So I'm just getting all the values that I might use and set them on self. So now I can use this initializer with just some of the dummy data. For example, I can directly use here the descriptions. I actually created here 2 different examples, because sometimes you have different lengths of the descriptions or different values that you might want to test. So I have here one static function example 1 and the other one static function example 2, which I wanted to use in my breed fetcher to create an example for a success state. So the fetcher's breeds property, I'm going to set now here to breed example 1 and breed example 2. So I have now here 2 data points that we can see in our breed list view. So here I can create a breed fetcher success state and use the breeds. So I would want to show here a list of all the breeds. So for each of my breeds, breed in. I'm not sure because this only works if my breed type is identifiable, which I haven't done. So I'm also conforming here to identifiable. This should work easily because it has a property ID which is unique. So we already get this very easily conforming here. So now I'm showing here the text with the breed name. Okay, I can try to run this. I see my loading state and then my main view appears with all the cats. So I'm going to recreate here the same UI. For each of my cats, I'm showing here a row with the cat image. So you have to load this using AsyncImage, the name and the information, and then add this here with a detail view. So first I'm creating 2 new views. So the first one is the breed raw in my list. This I want to show the breed. This is the type breed. Here I can use one of my examples. And the other view is the detail view. This is breed detail view. Again, this needs to have information of what breed we are showing. And again, I use in the preview one of my 2 examples. Example 1. So now I have these 2 views that we can use in our list. So the text in my list should be now moved in our breed raw. some other information. So for each of my breeds, I'm going to show here the breed raw for this breed. And I wanted to add here a navigation view. So each of my raws becomes navigation link. Destination is my breed detail view with this breeds, and the label is the raw. Since we have this, I can add here navigation title. I have now the 2 examples. Maybe I'm going to change the list style here to a plain list style. This is going to be nicer if we have images. So in our breed raw, I want to have the image, the title. So first, this should be in a H stack with the image, and here this in a V stack for the title and the description. So I have to have an H stack and a V stack. You can also directly use here alignment and spacing properties. So I have the breed name and the breed temperament. Maybe I make the font here headline, and I'm probably going to change here the preview to a fixed size of 300 times 200. Now I want to have the image on the left side. This might be nil. I'm just going to first check if I actually have an image. So if this is not nil, then I'm going to load my image with async image. This is new. You have to, it has here a couple of initializers. The one I'm using now is the one with content, because then I can change the image, the way the image that I get returned, how it's displayed. So first I have to give you an URL from string. This is my breeds image, force unwrapping, URL, force unwrapping. So if the image's URL is not nil, you can have a look in the documentation. The simplest one is just to show here an URL. And you can also use here the initializer where you return the content. So in this case, I have the possibility to resize this image and show also a progress view. So as long as it's loading, it shows the progress view, and otherwise the image. Then it has another one with face. So this is interesting if you also want to show a different thing for errors. So this face can be either I have an image, I have an error, or I'm still loading. So we can still show a loading indicator. So I'm just going to do the same here. In case I have an image, we can resize this and add a frame of 100 by 100. And now it's the question actually how I want to show this. I probably want to have still the aspect ratio. So this is scale to fill. Now it would flow over, so I'm going to use clipped. So I'm trying to make it, if it needs to be larger than this 100 by 100 square. If it's loading, I'm showing here a progress view. And maybe I should use the same frame. So this is let image size. This is a CG float, and this is 100, because I wanted to use this here in multiple places and I don't like to change it. For example, if I have nothing, I just want to show here a placeholder of color dot gray frame with this image size. I probably add the same frame to my progress view and my red one. So this is this placeholder. Just going to increase my width of this view. Maybe I should try and run this. My internet connection is not the fastest right now, but this is good because you can see all these loading animations. So nice, we have our images, fairly easy. And if I scroll down, it's going to load more because it's only loading the images when they appear, when it's actually needing them. And you see here there's one that failed. Right now I'm only showing here a red thing, but you can also show here the faces, arrow, localized description, with foreground color of pink. I'm just showing here this invite. and otherwise error. If you have an error, you could also show one of these more interesting emojis. Just don't know when this happens. This is the one that doesn't have any image. Here, this one was cancelled. I should change this here because before I use the white color. So, one thing that is a bit annoying, I'm not really sure why some of them fail. And I cannot retry. But I can at least show some informations. And these images are loading. So maybe I should use here something else. Because this one, the Persian cat, doesn't have an image in the return JSON. That's why it's gray. This is the case down here when I don't have a URL. This AsyncImage is fairly easy to use. So it's nice if you only support iOS 15. I'm planning to do another tutorial, maybe it's already existing when you watch this, where I'm talking about loading images. Now, one thing I want to also add in this view was the search bar. So I need to have here a search property at private bar search text. This is a string. And I want to add this as an input in a searchable search text. So if you scroll up, this search text field appears and give you all this nice information. My UI doesn't react to anything right now, so we need to filter the results in the list depending on the search text. So this is our filtered breeds. This is an array of breeds. This is a computed property because I'm calculating this out of my breeds property and my search text. So if my search text count is 1, I don't have anything to filter, so I probably should show all of them. 0. If this is 0, then I'm returning here my breeds. Else, I want to filter this. I'm going to return breeds dot filter dot name contains a search text. So now my list is not directly showing all breeds but the filtered breeds. This logic you could also move to the view model. It's rather up to you. Okay, now I look for something with a C. So it's nicely reacting to this and cancel, and then it shows all of them. I will just quickly here add the detail view. This is nothing super amazing. I can simply use again some of the logic that we defined in our breed raw. For example, this image. In this case, I probably want to have here a little bit of different formatting. In this UI, I used again an AsyncImage, with the difference that I use scale to fit, because I want to make sure it fits the whole space. And the frame height I set to a specific value of 300. I did add here a similar size for the placeholder of this image. And also the arrow state will be shown here. And down here there's another 8 VStack in there with a spacer, so I push it upwards with all the information. For the breed name, the temperament, the breed explanation. If it's hairless, it shows here the little hairless tag. And then down here an 8 stack for this energy level. The API has a lot more of these characteristics, so you could add multiple of these elements. If it's too big, you can also embed the whole thing in a scroll view. So, just using embed in VStack, use instead of scroll view, because then it adds the scrolling at the right moment. So here this would be scrollable. Even if you're on a smaller device, it will still work. We can also, this is not good, you can go through and see what kind of images are there. For example, this is a square image. You can also set the parameter a little bit higher or get the frame with the geometry reader to see how much you might want to use for this. You could also change this UI a little bit more. For example, you can remove the name of this breed on top of this image, or add another button where you can go to another detail view to load more images for this breed. You might also do this down here. When the user scrolls down, there's more images for this breed. There's quite a few things you could do. Or here, favorite button. The last thing is I want to at least test my error state. For example, here I just turned off the internet and it's giving me the internet connection appears to be offline. So even if the user now goes out, goes into settings and comes back, it's still the same. There's no reload button. So I probably should add a little button here. Button, action and label, text, try again. So we would need to start our fetch again. Luckily, okay, this is the reason why I actually have here the breed fetcher, because in the breed fetcher we had the fetch all breeds function. So here I have still this button. Okay, so it's trying actually again. If I go back and have internet and press try again, just takes it's a little bit difficult with the simulator. You saw it started loading again, showing me the loading animation. This is because I set it up anyway in the content view. Every time I'm starting another fetch, I set the loading to true, I reset my error to nil, and I load again. So this is a rather basic way of dealing with these errors, but it's quite useful if you are at least thinking about it. It's much nicer for the user if you at least give them some feedback of what's happening. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to write unit test. So I already added here a test target. So here I just want to write a simple test case, including my breed fetcher, to actually see that if I successfully fetch my breeds, do I update this property? Or here do I actually see these error messages placed on the right properties? But for my tests, the one thing that I depend on heavily is here my network request. So this I definitely would need to exchange to a mock service. So instead of the service class, the service structure that I wrote here with the network request, I would like to have a separate one with the mocks. So this is a new file, Swift file, API mock service. This is struct API mock. And in order to use this here with my breed fetcher, I have to work with dependency injection. So depending on what situation I am, I want to have a different service entity. So I need to inject it in the initializer, which needs to have a type, for which we can use protocols as a type. So I need to create another file. This is my API service protocol. This is a protocol API service protocol. What this needs to have is basically the function that I declared here, this one, to fetch me this data. So I'm copying the declaration and moving it here in my protocol. If you have multiple functions that you want to use, that you mock, you would add them here again. So my API service now should conform to API service protocol. And I also wanted to do this here for my mock one. Now it's going to complain because I didn't implement this function yet. Q, adding here fix. So now I could basically say completion and return a result. For example, a success. This was an array of breed, and I'm just returning here my example. This looks a little bit clumsy, but it gets a little bit more interesting when we set here the result as a property. This is only for my mock service, so this has to be of this type. Now in my completion handler, I'm returning this result, which makes the result here variable depending on what tests I want to run. Maybe I want to have the test of failure of the good path, the success, or the bad path, then I want to return here an error. So now that we have this nice little setup, I actually need to add this to my breed fetcher. So I need to have this stored here. This is my service. This is the protocol type. This is my API service protocol. So here I need to give the service, as it's an API service protocol, and I don't want to always specify this in my views, so I'm setting here the default value to my API service that I can then set to myself dot service to this service, which means that the one here in my fetcher function, I did create this previously, I shouldn't do that. I am simply using the one that I have here in this class definition. So if you run this, it's still going to be fine. I mean, it should be fine because I basically just added a little bit more code, but the functionality is still the same. Getting my cats from the server, nice. And now I finally can write a test. So in my test class, we can have here a setup and a teardown function. This is not the class. So I can write a test getting breeds, success. So I first have to have one of my breed fetcher. So fetcher is a breed fetcher. And now it's really important to set here actually a different service, because now I want to use my mock service API. This was the whole point. You can here say which result I want to have. This is a result. Success with an array of breeds. So this is the one I had previously, a result with a success case of just having one example here. Because it's generic, I have to specify the API error. Now I can set this result to my service class. And for this I need to work with expectations. This is a long-running task, so I work with expectations where I have to set a promise. Getting breeds. I'm going to use a little bit of combine. Import combine var subscriptions. This is a set of any cancellables. Now I'm going to subscribe to changes to my breeds property. So this is $breeds, this is a publisher. If I add here subscription with sync, I get the breeds. And if my breeds.count is bigger than 0, I know that my promise is fulfilled. I need to store this in my subscriptions and tell the system to wait for this one promise for 2 seconds. Okay, I can try to run this again. And I get here my cats. If I change here, for example, the results to a bad state, so failure. So it's not a success, it's a failure. API error, it doesn't really matter, bad URL. And we run again, this is going to get me a problem. Yes, so now it's telling me, yeah, it never got here the breeds because I actually never loaded successfully something. But this is another nice test case, which is a bad test case. Test loading error. So I would do the same here, just with the bad results. And I change this one to the good one. So again, this is my promise. Expectation, show error, message. And in this case, I could, for example, again check here that I never get more breeds. So if my breeds count breeds is not empty, then I should raise here exception, xc fail, store in subscriptions. And the thing that I actually care about is my error message. So this is $error message to subscribe to changes of the error message. Message, if message is not null, then I can say my promise is fulfilled. Again, I have to wait here, store in subscriptions, and wait for this promise. So I can run the whole thing again. Both of my test cases pass. If I have here an error, I know that my properties in my view model are updated correctly. One of them means that I never get any breeds, and the other one is I get an error message. The second case, the second result that we might want to check is actually getting data. So our breed array has some data, which we then check that we get something. Hopefully you see now the other reason why I used a little bit more complicated service layer, because then I can easier use unit tests and it's getting a little bit more abstract. In the teardown, what you also might want to do is reset the subscriptions to an empty array so we don't store any more of these tasks. In this example, it's getting quite complex, but I was trying to show you together with the UI how you work with a REST API and also take care of errors and loading states, so that you give the user a chance to maybe change something so he can still get his data and it's not just a dying UI or an empty UI. One of the things that is not working super nicely right now is the image loading. So how would we maybe optimize that we don't fetch so many images all over again? And maybe how we would ourselves load images, which we would need to do if you want to support lower iOS versions than 15, because this async image we can only use for iOS 15 plus. So for lower versions, we need to add a little bit more logic ourselves. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Happy coding.